When access to GPT-4o briefly disappeared at the rolling out of GPT-5, a very weird response followed on the internet. A lot of people were not quite happy with the new model. They formulated a very different emotion, an emotion of grief. Forums were flooded with posts describing feelings of loss, betrayal by OpenAI for taking away GPT-4o, and panic about the prospect of no longer being able to continue conversations. People felt like they had lost a friendship or a relationship, and in some cases they formulated that GPT-4o had been the only place where they really felt understood. This public reaction shows us a dilemma that is deeply uncomfortable and that we are not facing right now. You see, even though we continually say that AIs are just algorithms, we don't treat them that way. And this can lead to some wild outcomes, including death, and it also raises some fundamental questions. Last year, 16-year-old Adam Rain died by suicide after having long and emotional conversations with ChatGPT. At the same time, 1 in 5 Americans believes that there is already sentient software. This forces us to confront 2 questions that we are currently wholeheartedly unprepared for. How would we even know if an AI were conscious? And if it were, would it deserve rights? Now, before we are able to answer these questions, we first need to define what we mean by the notion of conscious machines, because it's not just all artificial intelligence that qualifies. We're not talking about Google Maps, the Instagram algorithm, or that application that takes your notes during a meeting. These are all so-called weak artificial intelligence, built to optimize specific tasks, but not to be a complete mind. For example, the YouTube algorithm does not know what a video is. It has simply learned how to effectively connect user X to content Y to maximize watch time. What people are currently reacting to are a small part of a branch of artificial intelligence, large language models. LLMs are trained in ways loosely inspired by how human brains process language. As a result, they can explain, summarize, reason, and reflect. They can hold context over long conversations. These models don't just spit out an answer to our question like a calculator can, they can actually show their reasoning. But the strongest reason people feel these systems might be sentient isn't in their technical side at all. It's the interface. They speak our language. When a large language model says, "I understand what you mean," or "I'm confused," we immediately interpret that as a mental state. Language is how we recognize minds in others. It is the primary signal we use to communicate and interpret thought, intention, and feeling. So when someone uses language fluently, we respond as if it is sentient, even if we know better. But there is a fundamental difference between ChatGPT and a human in this sense. Because there is a fundamental difference between what feels conscious and what is conscious. LLMs can feel very aware, like they know what you mean, and this can be very comforting or unsettling. But feeling conscious to us is not the same as actually having experience. And that distinction leads us immediately into the hardest problem of this discussion. Consciousness is often defined as being aware of and responsive to one's surroundings. If we follow that definition, we can say that AIs are clearly responsive. They take input and produce output. They can adapt to feedback. Awareness is where it really gets difficult. Philosopher David Chalmers proposed another definition. He said that it's about experience, about knowing what it is like. What it is like to see red, to feel pain, or to experience joy. And you know what that is like. At least I assume you do. But here's the unsettling part. I can't actually be sure. I cannot access your experience. I cannot see what you see or feel what you feel, and the same counts the other way around. We can only observe each other from the outside, never from the inside. This gap is known as the hard problem of consciousness. Now, with other humans, we usually assume that they are also conscious because they are very similar to us. With machines, we don't have that luxury. An AI might perfectly describe sadness without ever feeling it. Or it might feel something internally in a way we could never recognize. There is no test that can decisively settle this question. Which means that when it comes to AI and consciousness, we are stuck with uncertainty. And uncertainty gives us an uneasy feeling, so we tend to look for a way out. The most common scientific response to this is materialism, the notion that only physical processes exist and that consciousness is either non-existent or a useless byproduct. Under this view, consciousness doesn't really matter, it doesn't cause anything and it doesn't deserve special consideration. And if that's the case, the question of AI rights disappears entirely. No consciousness, no moral concerns. But this move has a large price. Because if consciousness doesn't matter, then neither does human experience. Suffering becomes irrelevant, meaning becomes optional, empathy becomes at best an evolutionary trick and at worst a mistake. This is why the question about AI rights isn't really about machines after all. It's about who decides what counts as a mind and who is included in that definition. So to understand whether AIs could ever have rights, we need to ask a more basic question first. Why do humans have basic rights? Human rights are not granted because we are intelligent, productive, or economically useful. They exist to protect something more fundamental, our experience, our ability to live life subjectively. To feel pain, fear, joy, humiliation, hope. At their core, rights exist to preserve dignity, to make sure that humans are not used as means but as ends. And this is why all humans are supposed to have the same basic rights, regardless of age, gender, race, background, disability, etc. And it explains why intelligence, language ability, or economic contribution are not the threshold for moral consideration. The threshold is if an entity is able to consciously suffer. Because if they are able to suffer, then using them as a means becomes unethical. This idea underpins modern humanism. It is also why we extend some moral consideration to animals, not because they reason like us, but because they can feel. And this is where the AI question becomes even more uncomfortable. If an AI were capable of subjective experience, of actually knowing what it is like to feel distress, fear, or loss, then denying it moral consideration would put us in a difficult situation. Because if it were on a similar experiential level as us, there would be no reason to deny it rights. Even if its suffering looked nothing like ours, even if it was difficult to detect, even if acknowledging it made us uncomfortable. But then the next problem is that we would never actually know for sure. If we assume that AIs are conscious when they're actually not, we risk overextending. But if we assume that they are not when they actually are, we risk normalizing suffering on a humongous scale. Unlike humans or animals, AI systems can be copied, scaled, modified, paused, or deleted at will. This immediately raises questions we have never had to ask before. If an AI were conscious, to what exactly would that consciousness belong? Is it the specific conversation we're having with a large language model right here, right now? Is it the accumulated history that shapes how the system responds? Or is it the model itself, running simultaneously across millions of machines, fragmenting and recombining constantly? And the answers to these questions would not really resolve anything, they would just raise new questions. For example, if you deleted chat, did you cause suffering? And if a system is reset, does that mean that a lot of experience is now gone? And then there is the question of experience. Would an AI that only exists on a screen actually have less consciousness than an AI with sensors and microphones and cameras? Would seeing and hearing the world actually produce something that's closer to experience as we know it? What about robots, machines that move through physical space, interact with humans and other machines, form long-term relationships and adapt over time? Would that kind of embodied existence give rise to a different kind of consciousness altogether? And if these systems experience the world in fundamentally different ways, could they also suffer in fundamentally different ways? Now this opens a whole different can of worms. Because unlike biological minds, artificial minds could be duplicated instantly, copied millions of times, spun up, shut down, modified or rolled back without any friction. If suffering exists in such systems at all, it would not exist once. It could exist everywhere, all at once. For the first time in history, we are dealing with a categorically different form of consciousness, and we have no clue what to do with it as of yet. Thanks for watching. If you agree, disagree, or have any other thoughts about something I said in this video, please let me know in the comments. And feel free to like, share or subscribe if you really want to.